There are phrases that seem harmless or even affectionate at first glance. But behind these words can lie manipulative intentions, emotional irresponsibility, and a dangerous resistance to personal growth. And when a woman ignores such warning signs, she risks getting into relationships that drain her energy, cloud her mental clarity, and alienate her from her inner strength. Carl Gustav Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist, spoke of the shadow of the unconscious, that deep place where qualities lie hidden that we often repress and project onto others. But this is precisely where toxic patterns can arise in a relationship. That's why it's crucial to recognize certain words from the outset in order to avoid greater damage. In this video, I'll show you 5 phrases you should listen out for when you hear them from a man. Because it's not just about avoiding conflict. That would be too superficial. But about understanding that behind a seemingly normal conversation, there is sometimes a psychological game that can destabilize you emotionally and destroy your inner balance. Seneca said, "It's not that we don't have enough time. We often waste it on people who don't deserve it." Therefore, be mindful. Each of these phrases has a deeper, more dangerous root. Ignoring them can lead you into an exhausting relationship where you lose your focus, your self-esteem, and worst of all, your connection to yourself. And believe me, no woman who respects herself and has worked on her inner peace and discipline should tolerate such dynamics. Stick with it until the end. I'll not only show you which phrases to avoid, but also how to respond with emotional intelligence, clarity, and inner strength. Let's get started. You have to accept me for who I am. At first glance, this sounds like authenticity or even vulnerable openness. But be careful. When a man uses this phrase to justify harmful behavior, you're dealing with one of the most common and dangerous red flags. Carl Jung taught us that self-knowledge is the beginning of all wisdom. But he also made it clear, and true growth only begins when we stop justifying ourselves and start integrating our shadow sides. Those who hide behind "that's just the way I am" are not authentic, but are refusing to develop. So phrases usually pop up when you've already noticed disturbing patterns of behavior. Emotional manipulation, avoidance of responsibility, or passive-aggressive behavior. And what's worse, when you try to talk about it, he portrays himself as the victim or blames you for trying to change him. But the most important thing is that accepting someone does not mean tolerating the unacceptable. True authenticity does not mean standing still, but having the courage to change. As the Stoic philosopher Aurel said, "The perfection of character is revealed in living each day as if it were your last." Without being guided by inertia or arrogance, a conscious woman who works on herself and strives for growth should not burden herself with a man who refuses to change. Being with someone like that is like rowing a boat alone while he refuses to even get in. If you accept such statements without questioning them, it often ends in a cycle of excuses, lessons, promises, and a relationship in which you do all the emotional work. Remember, even the Stoics knew how much our environment influences our growth. If the person by your side doesn't strengthen you, then they weaken you. So the next time you hear this sentence, don't be fooled by its apparent depth. Ask yourself this question: are you truly willing to look inside yourself? Or are you just looking for a pleasant excuse to avoid having to change? Because if what you say is constantly accompanied by resistance to growth, denial of your mistakes, and a defensive attitude toward any kind of criticism, then you are dealing with a behavior pattern that will only deepen over time. This is when the situation becomes serious. Accepting this sentence is often only the beginning. It is followed by other subtle but destructive behaviors. You will slowly find yourself in a relationship where only you are making an effort, adapting, sacrificing yourself, while he remains the same. And you must not do that to yourself. Protecting your inner peace is not selfish. It is self-care. You are not in this world to save someone else. You are here to share your life with someone who also wants to grow, who recognizes their mistakes and has the courage to work on themselves, just like you do every day. Someone who isn't willing to change is not only holding back their own development, but yours as well. Stay true to your values and act in accordance with them, even when your feelings urge you to stay, because what comes next is even more delicate. All my ex-girlfriends were crazy, they were toxic. When a man says this, it may initially sound like a harmless emotional outburst about past relationships. But don't be fooled. Behind these words lies a much deeper pattern, a clear sign of victimhood, emotional immaturity, and projection. In Stoic philosophy, real personal growth begins with honest self-reflection. Epictetus said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinion of them." So if a man blames all his ex-girlfriends for everything that went wrong and never mentions his own responsibility, then he probably doesn't want to look in the mirror. This is where depth psychology comes into play. Carl Gustav Jung taught that what we do not make conscious controls us from the shadows, and often it is precisely the men who speak badly about all their ex-partners who are actually projecting their own unresolved issues. This statement reveals a danger. People who are stuck in this story rarely take responsibility for their decisions. Instead, they repeat blame, dramatize the past, and hope that you will unknowingly confirm their story by being the only one who doesn't disappoint him. But be careful, no one can escape their shadow if they don't acknowledge it. The real question is it really possible that all his ex-girlfriends were toxic? Or is there a pattern behind it that he doesn't want to admit to himself? A conscious woman who knows her own worth and has learned to stay true to herself must ask herself this question seriously. Jung said, "What we reject subjugates us." And a relationship with someone who doesn't acknowledge their emotional responsibility is like building a house on sand. No matter how hard you try to build a healthy relationship, he will continue to act out his old unconscious script. And worst of all, sooner or later, the story he tells about his ex will turn against you. Because if you want to be the victim, you always need a new culprit. Maintaining such a relationship is like rowing a boat with a leak. No matter how much love you pour into it, it will continue to sink. Now is the moment when you need emotional discipline. Look at behind the words. Ask yourself, has he ever talked about his own mistakes in previous relationships? Or does his entire narrative consist of what he claims has been done to him? If he's never taken responsibility before, why would he start now? Remember, it's not your job to be anyone's therapist. You're not here to fix broken men who don't want to heal. You're here to share your journey with someone who is willing to walk with you and not drag you into their own shadow. And when we talk about emotional manipulation, there's one phrase you need to recognize immediately. Because even though it sounds like a declaration of love, it's actually a highly dangerous emotional trap. If you really love me, you would do what I say. This is one of the most subtle but also most damaging forms of emotional blackmail. At first glance, it may seem like an expression of emotional needs, but behind it lies manipulative pressure that exploits your feelings of love to exert control. The Stoics believed that true love never means coercion, but is a conscious decision based on freedom, mutual respect and deep admiration, not on guilt or demands. Epictetus said, "No one can enslave you emotionally unless you allow them to." And that is precisely the goal of such statements, to turn affection into a means of power. Don't be fooled by such seemingly emotional words. True love is based on free will, not blackmail. Carl Gustav Jung also spoke about this dynamic in the context of power. In his studies on the shadow, he showed how unbalanced relationships arise when one person projects their insecurity and need for control under the guise of love. And such statements are a clear example of this. When a man says something like this to you, he draws an invisible line that makes your affection conditional. Basically, it means that if you do what I want, you are worthy of my love. That is not love, that is hidden emotional manipulation. An emotionally mature woman must have the clarity to distinguish between a healthy request and a disguised demand. Because if you give in to such statements, it may feel like proof of love at the moment, but over time you will lose yourself bit by bit. Your authenticity, your boundaries, your inner strength. And the most dangerous thing is that the more you give in, the higher the expectations become. What starts as proof of your love slowly turns into a pattern of emotional submission. In the end, you no longer know whether you are acting out of love or out of fear of losing him. Such statements do not build a connection. They destroy it quietly and insidiously. So if you ever find yourself in a conversation where you feel guilty just for protecting your boundaries, defending your time, or expressing your opinion, pause. You are facing someone who confuses love with possession. You're not here to please everyone, especially not at your own expense. You're here to have a relationship where you can grow, express yourself, and be yourself. No strings attached. If a man tells you that if you really loved him, you would do what he says, he's not just questioning your feelings, he's attacking your character. These words seek neither understanding nor connection. They want control. It's a failed attempt to undermine your willpower through guilt and blur your boundaries in order to enforce his own. Jung said, "True love is neither possessive nor manipulative, but a conscious act of shared freedom." Stoic wisdom reminds us that genuine love is rooted in mutual respect, not in control or submission. When affection is twisted into a tool for emotional manipulation, it stops being love and turns into control masked as care. Yielding to such pressure doesn't just weaken your inner discipline, it slowly undermines your sense of self-worth. A woman who is invested in her growth, who understands and honors her own value, should never compromise herself just to keep the peace. Because every time you give in, even though you don't want to, you move a little further away from yourself. And the most dangerous thing about it is that once you allow it, the pattern repeats itself. First, it's a small request, then a bigger demand. And one day you realize that you are living according to his wishes, not your own. You have become a supporting character in your own life. The answer, in keeping with the Stoics or a follower of Jung's thinking, is clear and powerful. Stay centered, act according to your principles, not according to the whims of someone who doesn't respect your boundaries. Because someone who truly loves you doesn't need to convince you through guilt. They listen to you. They understand you and respect you, even if you don't always agree. It's better to have an uncomfortable but honest conversation than to live every day in a relationship where you lose your emotional freedom. You don't have to endlessly explain yourself or justify your decisions if they are in line with your heart, because a wise woman knows that not every fight is worth fighting. And fights that aim to break your will shouldn't even start in the first place. And while we're on the subject of emotional manipulation, here comes one of the most toxic phrases, as subtle as it is cruel. You're not good enough for me. Hearing these words from someone who claims to love you can be deeply hurtful. It's a phrase that not only hurts, it aims to destroy your inner security at its core. It's not simple criticism. It's a direct attack on your identity, your worth, your very essence. Carl Jung explained that many people project their own inner dissatisfaction onto others, and that's exactly what this sentence is, pure projection. When a man tells you that you're not good enough for him, he's not talking about you, but about his inner teachings, his distorted expectations, and his insatiable need for control. He is trying to make you feel small so that you become dependent on his validation. Stoic philosophy reminds us that our true value does not depend on the judgments of others, but on our virtue, our actions, and our inner consistency. Marcus Aurelius summed it up. Don't let the soul of another rule over yours. And that is exactly what this sentence aims to do, to dominate you out of his insecurity. Anyone who compares you, talks you down, or implies that you are not good enough does not want love. They want you to make an effort, but not out of affection, but to win their approval. And in this game, you will always lose because the goal is constantly shifting. Today you are not good enough because of X, tomorrow because of Y, and in the end you are exhausted and doubt things that were once crystal clear to you. A conscious woman does not beg for affection and does not have to prove her worth to anyone. You are not here to adapt to the changing expectations of another person. You are here to share your life with someone who sees you for who you are and inspires you to grow, not to doubt. So if you ever hear that sentence, pause, take a deep breath, and remember who you are. Don't believe the lie. You don't have to be more for someone who can't even see what you already are. That insecurity isn't yours, it's theirs. As Jung said, you can't make the light inside you visible to someone who is only looking for shadows. And as a Stoic woman would say, your inner peace is worth more than any attempt to conform to someone else's ideal. External recognition is fleeting, unstable, and often self-serving. Real strength and security begin when a woman learns to affirm herself, trust her inner voice, and stay true to her own principles. Few things are more damaging than letting someone, especially a man who preys on your vulnerabilities, determine your value. When a man tells you that you're not enough for him, know that it's not a reflection of truth, but a distortion rooted in his own issues. It's a projection of his inner teachings, his inflated ego, and his need for control. That statement doesn't want closeness. It wants to keep your thoughts and self-esteem under constant scrutiny. And that evaluation, I promise you, will never be fair. Carl Jung explained, what we do not make conscious becomes our fate. And if you don't recognize such statements early enough, you may end up in a relationship where you are constantly trying to prove your worth and forgetting yourself in the process. The Stoics taught us, no opinion from outside has power over you unless you give it that power. Marcus Aurelius said it clearly, don't let another person's soul rule yours. If a man constantly makes you feel that you are not enough, then the wisest decision is not to convince him otherwise, but to walk away with dignity, not out of pride, but out of respect for yourself. Emotional discipline means not letting words without substance destroy what you have built with hard work. Your self-confidence, your clarity, your freedom. As Seneca said, the greatest power is self-control, and it begins the moment you decide to no longer accept emotional crumbs disguised as constructive criticism. So when you hear that sentence, take a deep breath, stand up straight, and remember, the problem isn't with you, it's with their need to feel superior by making you feel insecure. Walk away with the certainty that your worth does not depend on the standards of someone who has never really seen you. And now we come to one of the most dangerous, subtle statements ever. Do whatever you want, said in a passive-aggressive tone. When a man says this sentence with coldness, irony, or resentment, he's not really inviting you to decide freely. What he's really doing is setting an emotional trap to manipulate you through guilt. He's not giving up control, he's disguising his attempt at blackmail. Carl Jung spoke about the hidden ways in which people manipulate from the shadows, and that's exactly what this sentence is, a form of denial of clarity and responsibility. He doesn't say what he feels. He doesn't say what he thinks, but he expects you to guess. And if you don't, blame, drama, or accusations follow. Stoic philosophy teaches us that healthy relationships are based on clear and direct communication. Seneca summed it up. Speak so that your words require no interpretation. If someone meets you with hints or speaks with a double meaning, they are not really communicating. They are emotionally manipulative. Such statements put you in a state of constant uncertainty. You try to interpret, adapt, avoid conflict, until you eventually realize that you are more concerned with their emotions than your own. Slowly, your inner peace begins to crumble. An emotionally mature woman should not get involved in such games in the first place. The best response to a sentence like, do whatever you want, is to take it literally. Act without fear, without justifications, without getting caught up in his emotional web. This reaction breaks the cycle of manipulation and forces the other person to take responsibility. He will either learn to express himself with honesty, or he'll find himself alone with his passive-aggressive behavior, because you're no longer available for emotional manipulation. Both Jung and Stoic thinkers emphasize that living with honesty and intention is a form of personal liberation. And that freedom begins when you stop reacting on impulse and start choosing, with awareness, how you speak, what you tolerate, who you share your energy with, and when to respond with clarity or step away from vague, draining conversations. This is not coldness. It is emotional intelligence. It is the way to nip manipulation in the bud and make it clear that You are not willing to let your feelings be played with. The Stoic attitude toward such situations is simple and powerful. Do not try to decipher what the other person does not dare to say directly. Ambiguity is a tool of control. A conscious woman, just like a wise man, always chooses clarity, consistency, and inner freedom. Stay true to your decisions, act with steadfastness, and never forget. A man who really wants to be with you doesn't need to manipulate you, speak in riddles, or provoke you emotionally. True love does not hide behind games. It shows itself in openness. Inner peace arises when thoughts, words, and actions are in harmony. And as we have seen in this video, these seemingly harmless phrases are often clear warning signs. If you don't recognize them in time, they can lead you into relationships that rob you of energy, focus, and ultimately your very essence. Stoic philosophy and Carl Jung's depth psychology invite us to look deeper beyond words, to see not just the moment but the pattern behind it, to protect our emotional stability with wisdom. Because it's not about judging others but about recognizing the right moment to withdraw before